President Donald Trump is abandoning the plan to charge for U.S. protection in the Strait of Hormuz. In a social media post, he says Gulf states will invest in the U.S. instead. International law gives vessels free right of passage through the passageway, which carries about a fifth of the world's oil. It is important to note that Iran effectively controls it.